Michigan man himself, Braylon Edwards. Malachi Corley, the newest New York Jet, selected 65th overall. Joe Douglas executes his second trade in as many days, moves up from 72 to 65, and the Jets add another wide receiver to the group that actually, EA, feels like it's a great compliment to both Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, and the rest of the receivers.
Number one, how about poetic justice? Braylon Edwards, a Michigan man, delivering the news of another receiver coming to New York, Malachi Corley, who frankly, I was quite surprised he was on the board at the beginning of round 3. Credit Joe Douglas for what he's done here early in the draft, the way he maneuvered in round 1, picking up Olu Fashanu, and then coming back here in round 3 and moving up to get Malachi Corley, a guy who's dynamite with the ball in his hands, just very explosive. The Jets needed another piece in that wide receiver room entering the draft, and they needed tackle help. Now what has Joe Douglas done with his first 2 selections? He gets a big left tackle and then comes back with a guy who was just a terrorizing player against defenders throughout his career at Western Kentucky.
5'10", 207, and when you're taking a look at the highlights, what you might notice is that he breaks tackles. That's the book on Malachi Corley, 55 broken tackles, and also he led the FBS in YAC and forced missed tackles by a wide receiver in 2022. He's first team all-conference CUSA. He's led the conference in receiving yards each of the last 2 seasons. He led the team in receiving yards. He really is like a stick of dynamite, and he's powerful with the ball in his hands. He wants to run you over, which is something that I'm not saying that Garrett Wilson doesn't want to do that. This is something that the Jets did not necessarily have last year.
Well, Robert Saleh said it during his news conference following the selection that, hey, if he lines up and sees a family member by the goal line, he's going through him. The bottom line is, this guy runs angry. He plays angry. Jets fans are going to love him. And think about the way this wide receiver room has been reshaped throughout the offseason. Yes, Garrett Wilson is the star piece, but the Jets go out in free agency and sign Mike Williams, a big weapon on the outside, one of the best contested ball catchers in the National Football League. And then going into the draft, you're thinking, okay, when is it going to happen? When are the Jets going to get one of those receivers? And oh, by the way, at the start of this draft, 10 of the first 37 selections were wide receivers. But Joe Douglas, again, probably getting nervous there in the draft room because this is the guy the Jets wanted as far as a receiver is concerned. And he moves up in the 3rd round, very aggressive. Love the move.
And there was a run of wide receivers in the start of the 2nd round. Keon Coleman, the first pick of the 2nd round, goes to Buffalo. Then later on in the 2nd round, A.D. Mitchell goes to Indianapolis. You're sitting there as a Jets fan like, is Joe Douglas going to take some of this draft capital that he acquired yesterday, moving from 10 to 11 with the Vikings, and move back up to secure his guy? Roman Wilson out of Michigan was available. Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. The Jets go with Corley. And how about this from Peter Schrager? He said, Jets fans and Kyle Brandt, text from a rival GM on Jets 2nd round pick Malachi Corley. He will win multiple Good Morning Football angry runs this year. Just watch. The Yak King, fun player to talk about in the pre-draft process, ends up with Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams with the New York Jets. The angry runs thing is real. Like, if you're setting the over-under of appearances for Malachi Corley as a rookie on angry runs, I think you got to go 2.5.
He's such a threat because anytime you get the ball in his hands, he can do something with it. And then you're pairing him up with a guy like Garrett Wilson. And start to think about the weapons the Jets have offensively in terms of big play potential. You add him to an offense that already had Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. And Breece Hall coming off his injury last year, what he was able to do with 1,400 yards out of the backfield, both passing and receiving. The Jets are just becoming a more well-balanced attack. And Aaron Rodgers, quite happy about the selection. Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas said shortly after this selection, they got a text from Aaron Rodgers saying, I'm excited.
And Aaron Rodgers went to Twitter with the eyes emoji. I mean, look, if you're a Jets fan, you're excited. If you're Aaron Rodgers, you're excited because this is a guy that you can just get the ball in his hands and let him go to work.
So
in college,
Greens, what do you think about Deebo Samuel Light?
So, yeah, someone on the broadcast said, like, a sawed-off Deebo Samuel, like he's a shorter version of him, which, okay, first of all, a little, you could have worded that a little better, but I do think that the play style is very similar. I think Deebo Samuel's obviously like what every hard-nosed, tackle-breaking wide receiver wants to aspire to be. Deebo's a great player. He's an all-pro. But I think the play style is very similar. Actually, Dane Brugler in his The Beast, which obviously he does a great job every year, says his NFL comparison is somewhere between Deebo Samuel and Amari Rodgers, who was also a shorter, more compact receiver drafted by the Packers out of Clemson a couple seasons ago. But I think what stands out to me about Corley is when you look at where he lined up in college, 91.6% of his snaps came in the slot. Now, that's not something to say that he's only a slot receiver. That's what he was asked to do at Western Kentucky. I'm sure when he gets here to Florham Park under Sean Jefferson's tutelage, the Jets might elaborate or might broaden his horizon in terms of a receiver.
Well, you have options on the inside now, more options, I should say, because Garrett Wilson can play anywhere in any offensive formation. He can excel in the slot, but he also can excel outside the numbers. And then you're just giving yourself another weapon in Corley. And think about this receiver group as a whole. We know Mike Williams coming off the ACL, and the Jets are very hopeful that he's going to be 100% week one. That's the expectation. So you got him, that big body out there. And Garrett Wilson is a guy who's dynamic after the catch. And then you add a guy who's also dynamic after the catch in the Yak King, Malachi Corley. And oh, by the way, this tight end group who we were talking about before the draft commenced, of course, you got Tyler Conklin, who had 60-plus catches last year. You got Jeremy Ruckert. So, again, a more well-balanced attack in terms of your options here. Malachi Corley doesn't have to come in here and be the number one guy right away. With that being said, Aaron Rodgers is going to have a ton of people he can get the football to. And the thing about Corley is you don't have to pass him the ball 30 yards down the field for him to make big things to happen.
It's crazy you said that because 75.7% of his catches in 2023 came within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. And he's a piece to this overall puzzle, but he's someone that can contribute immediately. You take a look at what he did at Western Kentucky. He started 12 games this past season, set a school record with 259 career receptions. In 2023, he had 79 catches, 984 yards, which is a 12.5 average and 11 touchdowns. And his career stats, over 3,000 yards, 11.5 per average, and 29 touchdowns is very impressive. Seafood broil, Malachi Corley. I don't know about that. I mean,
What do you mean?
It would not be my move if I were drafted. It's a good move. It's not my move.
You're making this about you?
Yeah, maybe I am. I think. Look, it's cool. I also thought it was really cool. He said he's the first player
Oh my
from
God.
his town to sign a letter of intent from Campbellsville, Texas.
What a story. You were quoting Dane Brugler before as far as the Beast. Corley was the number 268 cornerback in the 2020 recruiting class and the number 27 recruit in Kentucky. He played at a high school that had a graduating class of 250 students.
Yeah, I think the story, like one of my favorite parts of the draft is the stories of all the prospects. Malachi Corley definitely has a very cool story. Olu Fashanu has a good story too. When you talk about like his parents immigrating from Nigeria, going to Penn State, committing to his education. Now he's the 11th overall pick. The Jets draft, I think overall though, EA, is shaping up the way that you would expect it when you take a look at the mock drafts like 2 days ago. Tackle, receiver were options at number 10 overall, which is what the Jets held before trading back one spot. With their first 2 picks, none of which they had originally coming into the draft, by the way, they go tackle and then wide receiver.
These dudes are competitive ball players, and they're going to add to the culture here what the Jets are creating. And I think they're going to be perfect fits inside the locker room. You're talking about Fashanu, a kid who went back to Penn State, worked on not only improving as a football player, but completing his degree. And Corley is a guy who he basically had to market himself out of high school just to get an opportunity to play college football. And the bottom line is both of these guys, they play with their hair on fire. They want to get better. They're coming into a program that the Jets want to return to contender status. On paper, the Jets have vastly improved here over the first 2 days of the draft, getting these guys, and that comes after Joe Douglas really, I thought, knocking it out of the park in free agency, where he came into the draft with not a glaring need. We knew the Jets could add to a tackle, could add a tackle, could add a receiver. Mike Williams, 1-year deal. You're talking about Tyron Smith, 1-year deal. Also, Morgan Moses, of course, up at the end of the season. So you get a new receiver, you get a new tackle who not only, hey, down the line, these guys can be foundational pieces for you, but you can learn from very accomplished players in the National Football League.
And not for nothing, like, I do feel like history of the NFL draft tells you that a third-round wide receiver has a higher likelihood in history to produce early than a third-round tackle.
Well, help me out here. Let's go through the names. We can bounce them off each other. How about Tank Dell last year?
No, exactly. Like Nico Collins, again from the Texans, was a 4th-round pick. Or you think about second-round picks that are drafted later. DK Metcalf was one of those. A.J. Brown, second-round pick.
How about St. Brown?
Amon-Ra St. Brown.
With the Lions. The draft is in Detroit this year, yes.
And he just got paid.
Stephon Diggs just got traded from Buffalo to Houston. I believe he was a 5th-round pick.
Yeah.
Out of Maryland.
Yeah. So, like, the history of day 2 and day 3 receivers is more successful than a day 2, day 3 tackle.
So this is a huge point because we entered the draft and we knew that, hey, this is a really good tackle class. This is a really good wide receiver class. But where was the greater depth? The greater depth was at receiver. So Joe Douglas attacks tackle early and then goes that depth route at the wide receiver spot. I got to feel that he is going to rest quite comfortably tonight.
Yeah, and the Jets have a bevy of picks on day 3, which is tomorrow. That's rounds 4 through 7. And you can watch all 7 rounds across 3 days. Of course, that started April 25th, ends tomorrow, the 27th, with NFL Network draft coverage presented by Verizon. Additional coverage on ABC, ESPN, and ESPN Deportes. It's also streaming on NFL Plus. For more on this pick, Malachi Corley to the Jets, here's Caroline Hendershot with Joe Douglas. Great to hear from Joe Douglas, as always. EA, you said earlier that, you have to make it about you, huh? Well, I got something to make it about you and the Florida Gators. Malachi Corley's cousin, Jeff Demps.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, listen. Well, it goes back to the Gators. A UF connection.
Was a track star, Jeff Demps, as well at Florida. Corley ran track in high school. He also played basketball, averaged 17.5 points per game, 8.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists per game as a senior.
All right. So Corley last year, multi-sport star in high school, did a lot of things, accomplished, like you said. People talk about, okay, what was the caliber play you were playing coming from Western Kentucky? Well, against Ohio State last year, he showed up, 8 catches, 88 yards, and a touchdown. The thing that I really want to emphasize here is defensively for years, the Jets have been getting after people with the physical mindset, and they just are coming at you in waves. And this is a very good defense that I think is going to be better in 2024 when you add a guy like Hassan Reddick to the equation. Offensively, yes, you're going to get the quarterback back, and that's a huge piece, the most important position of all sports. But what the Jets have done this year is they've emphasized in the offseason a physical mindset. It starts at the offensive line. Joe Douglas goes out and gets John Simpson, and then he reacquires Morgan Moses, and then he gets Tyron Smith. And then he comes back in the draft and gets Olu Fashanu and Malachi Corley. What the Jets have right now is an offense that's going to be able to get after you in the trenches, and then also with the guys with the ball in their hands, and Corley is another piece to that.
And just to be clear, the Jets have only had 2 picks. They didn't have a second-round pick. They used some of their capital to move up, secure their player that they wanted to draft. That was Malachi Corley. Now looking ahead for the New York Jets, they have a number of day 3 selections. And if we were to look at the landscape of positions that the Jets could address, last week Joe Douglas said he wants this team to become like the quarterback factory that the Green Bay Packers had.
Yep.
You're talking about Mark Brunell, a day 3 pick, Matt Hasselbeck, Aaron Brooks. And so when you take a look at the top remaining quarterbacks still available, Spencer Rattler out of South Carolina has not been taken. Now, the Jets aren't on the clock for a long time, right? Right now, it is still the 3rd round, the number 82 overall pick. The Cardinals are on the clock. The Jets don't pick until the mid-100s. So when you take a look at who's available, Michael Pratt's a very interesting story. And then Jordan Travis, someone out of Florida State who maybe there's a discount sticker on him because he's rehabbing from a gruesome injury at Florida State. So when you take a look at these quarterbacks, EA, do you think that, 1, a day 3 quarterback is in the mix for the Jets? And 2, if you had to choose anyone from this list, is there someone that you think fits what the Jets do more than the other?
Okay, I'm going to borrow a line that you always use. If I'm a betting man, yes, the Jets are going to take a quarterback on day 3. They only have 2 quarterbacks on the roster right now with Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor. I don't think Spencer Rattler will be there if they stay where they're at in round 4. Pratt's a really interesting guy as far as the intangibles he brings to the table and what he did at Tulane. And then you go down that list. You talked about Jordan Travis, yes, coming off big-time injury. But for anybody who steps into this situation for the Jets, you're a developmental player. So the bottom line is you bring in a young guy, and they're going to be able to soak in a lot of knowledge from Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor. So right now, the way the board is, the players are coming off the board right now, yeah, one of those guys certainly could be in play early in the 4th round for the Jets.
And the Jets have 4 or 3 4th-round picks, as you see right here. Maybe the Jets, if they want to get a guy, like you said, if they want, let's say, Michael Pratt or one of these other quarterbacks or another position, they could package some of these and make sure to move up in the 4th round.
Yeah, and you mentioned Travis. Daniel Jeremiah, I talked to him prior to the draft. He actually said Devin Leary maybe after Spencer Rattler. That's the way he rates those guys. So,
I also think, it'll be interesting to see what type of positions the Jets want to add on day 3. Joe Douglas has done a great job of finding pieces on day 3 who either become spot starters, guys I think of like Brandon Eccles, Jamie Sherwood, 2 prime examples of core special teamers who, if you're in a pinch, do a good job starting.
Yeah, So we look at the safety position. The Jets make the re-signings of both Chuck Clark and Ashton Davis. Tony Adams played very well, and you know he's going to continue to get better. JBC on this roster as well. Maybe that's a position where you add on day 3 of the draft. How about defensive tackle? A lot of guys on one-year deals next to Quinnen Williams as well on the defensive side of the ball. Linebacker, you always could be looking to add some depth there as well. And then finally, how about the running back piece, Greens?
Yeah, I think running back's interesting because Joe Douglas has selected a running back. I'm doing the math in my head. I'm pretty sure every single draft that he's been general manager since in 2020.
Yeah.
Think about LaMichael Pirine, Michael Carter, Breece Hall, Izzy Abanikanda. So almost all of those players, except for Breece, have been day 3 selections. Now, the way that the Jets running back room is right now, you have your horse and Breece Hall. You have Izzy Abanikanda, who I think had like I wouldn't say like a redshirt year, but he had some games down the stretch, some significant run. Maybe he comes back bigger, stronger, more reliable in year 2. And so I think that would it surprise me if Joe Douglas adds a player? Not at all in terms of the backfield. But would it surprise me if he elects to go a different route, or maybe the Jets want a more of a proven veteran behind those 2 guys? That would not surprise me either.
He's got it to the point where it's going to be a hard time for a few of these guys on day 3 if he ends up keeping all these picks, making the roster. Because the Jets have greatly increased their depth here throughout the offseason. But the running back position could be a spot where you add another young guy to the equation. You got the star in Breece Hall, who's got to be licking his chops as far as what the Jets have added up front and around him. Here, Izzy Abanikanda, I think he's a perfect fit for this system. He's only going to get better. But maybe you take a flyer late. And again, the Jets are going to end this draft with Mr. Irrelevant. But the bottom line is, right now, this offseason, the Jets are going to be very relevant in 2024.
I like what you did there.
Oh, yeah.
Kalen Bullock, who was on that top safeties list, he just went a couple picks ago, 78th overall.
Okay.
Another position the Jets could add, defensive tackle. They have a lot of one-year deals up front.
Right.
Javon Kinlaw, Lecky Fotu, Solomon Thomas. Someone that I think could be interesting, he was in Mobile, is Dwayne Carter out of Duke.
Okay.
He seemed like a rotational piece. Also, his father played with the Jets for a couple seasons in the 80s. Just food for thought. Not that that means anything. I just think that'd be a fun storyline, especially when it comes to content, which is what we're making here.
Yeah, we are making content. And speaking of content, Leger Douzable was part of our pre-draft coverage. He actually pegged Mekhi Wingo out of LSU, defensive tackle, to the Jets. So we'll have to see how it all plays out on day 3. But you have a lot of options. You have to be feeling quite good because as those receivers came off the board there early in round 2, I was worried about what was going to be left there. And Joe Douglas, I'm sure he was making calls throughout round 2, but finally in round 3, he gets up right at the top. Malachi Corley here is a Jet. You have to appreciate the way Douglas not only attacked free agency, but what he's done here so far through 2 days of the draft.
Did you see Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas's text to each other?
No.
Well, the New York Jets social team had it. This is an ode to Sonny Weaver, also known as Kevin Costner from Draft Day. Malachi Corley, no matter what. The Jets move up from 72 to 65. They secure that player right there. The Yak King joins the green and white. The Jets have had 2 picks in as many days. Olu Fashanu, the number 11 overall pick. Malachi Corley joins the receiver room. Coach Saleh, Joe Douglas, Aaron Rodgers, all very excited about the Yak King joining the green and white. The Jets have a bevy of picks tomorrow on day 3 of the NFL draft as that wraps up. And we'll see you after the draft, after Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh make all the selections for the 2024 Jets draft class ending tomorrow, which is crazy. But that's
not really ending. It's never an end to roster construction because then you have undrafted free agents. But speaking of ending, our technical director, Matt Sickoff's saying that we got to go.
We got 5 seconds. I just want to say check out the draft review in a couple weeks on CBS.
Yeah, the Yak King is in New York.